this is my cousin Connor, and today he's going to explain how to play the game of squash, including the rules, equipment, and the court. After that, I will be asking him some questions.
Alright, hi guys, I'm Connor. I play squash full time, and I just joined the professional squash tour, and I'm going to explain to you all about squash. So we got a little diagram here. It'll show the squash court. So at the top here you can notice that there's lines that go down each wall, and this is the outline. If you hit the ball anywhere above this line, the ball is considered out and you lose the point. We got in the middle here is the service line. So the service line only comes into play for the serve. To serve, to start a point, you have to serve from either this service box or this service box, in which you have to have at least 1 foot in the box while you're serving. While you're making the serve, you have to hit the ball above this service line and below this outline, and the ball has to go off of the front wall and come back into the opposite quarter of the court. Once the serve is made and your opponent returns the ball, then the service line is no longer in use until the next serve. This bottom line here to the ground is called the tin. The tin is usually made of tin, and if you hit the ball below this line, it will make a loud sound, and in which the ball is now considered down, and you also lose that point. These service boxes, as well as this tee line, is only in use for the serve. So if you're serving from this side, you have to hit it above the service line and into this service quarter, not into the box itself, but into this quarter of the court that goes back to the back wall, and same vice versa from the other side. And it shows here the tee, so it's a line down the middle and goes about across the middle of the court. This is not necessarily used, but it's just a spot to kind of show where you want to be strategically. So after each shot, you want to try and get back to this spot because it's in the middle of the court, and it'll allow you to get, it's equal distance from each corner of the court, so it's the most efficient way to wait for your next shot. And that's everything about the squash court. All right. Now we'll get into the squash racket. So this is the squash racket that I use. It's the general shape of a racket kind of has the circle with the strings here, and it'll usually have a throat. There are some rackets that are all strings. They don't have this throat, it's just strings in between. And then this bottom part is a grip. So a grip is actually replaced, usually depending on how much you play. I'll change my grip once every week, in which you just take it off and wrap a new one on however you want. And the strings are also replaceable, so if I'm playing fairly often, I'll usually break one of my strings every 2 to 3 weeks, and in which I'll cut the strings out and I'll restring the racket. And the racket itself, if it breaks around the frame, is no longer usable and you'll have to buy a new one. Alright, then we'll get into the shoes. So this is a pair of squash shoes that I wear. Generally a squash shoe is flat on the bottom so that you're able to get good grip. It's always got good rubber on the bottom, so you can move directions, change, and go in and out of corners very easily. And they're usually fairly low profile to the ground so that you don't roll over on your ankle, and fairly supportive with lots of good durable rubber, or they use like certain types of skin or felt in there so you don't rip through the shoe. And finally, the last piece you need is a squash ball. So we'll start with this, it's called a double yellow dot, and this is the most common ball used in squash. All average players up to the professional level will use this ball, as it's a combination of slow and fast, kind of not too bouncy but not too dead at the same time. So that's the ball that everyone uses usually. And then it'll range, you have different variations. So this, as you can see, this blue ball is for beginners at a young age or just starting out. The ball is a little bigger and it's a little harder, so it bounces more to promote longer rallies and easier to hit. And then we have this is actually a foam ball, it's not rubber. And this is used for young kids that are just starting out. It's very light, it bounces a lot, it's easier to hit because it's larger and it's a little brighter color, so kids have an easier time hitting it and seeing it. And then just a couple of interesting things of variations. So this is another ball, it's called a green dot. This is used at the professional level. So if you go to certain cities or countries with high altitude, the air is lighter, so the ball tends to stay up longer and bounces more. So this ball is actually a little heavier and thicker, so that the ball drops more, so that the rallies don't last too long. Otherwise, it's very hard to put the ball away and end a rally. Another variation of this ball, they make it in white. So it's actually these two are the same ball, except for this one is white because at the top professional level, they'll play on all glass courts where every wall of the court is glass in order to seat more viewing so people can watch from the front, the sides, and the back of the court. Whereas on a normal court, you can usually only watch from the back. And this is white because the walls are usually a darker color, so it's easier to see. And this last one here is a doubles ball. So as you can see, this one is a little squishy, and this one is basically rock hard. So this is it's called hardball doubles, which is it's a North American game. 4 people, 2 on each team, and it's actually played on a larger court. So this was developed in North America and is a slight variation of the single squash game. So those are all the different types of balls. So you got basically to play a squash game, you need your racket, your shoes, a ball, and for anyone under the age of 19 and is highly recommended for all players, there's a safety protection glasses that you have to wear on your eyes just to protect yourself from getting hit with the ball or the racket. And I guess let's get into some questions now.
Okay, so to start, how old were you when you started playing squash?
So I started playing when I was about 6 years old. This was because my dad actually was in the squash industry as a profession, so he started me out very young.
How long does a normal squash match last?
So a squash match can actually range quite a bit. It depends on the caliber of players as well as the opponent that you're playing. So the higher the level, the longer the rallies last. So for a match that is played at a lower level, or if you're playing at a higher level but one player is quite a bit better than the other player, it can be done, I'd say, as quickly as 20 minutes. And when you're playing at a professional level and you're playing with 2 players that are very similar in ability, a squash match can actually last all the way up to 2 hours long.
How much do you train?
So I just started playing full-time in the last year and a half, and since then I probably train about 4 hours a day, usually 6 days a week with 1 rest day.
How often do you compete in tournaments?
So the squash season is actually similar to the hockey season. It runs from September to end of May. And during that time, I'd say on average, I probably play around 2 tournaments a month, usually out of town. So it can be 3 a month with one the next month. You know, some months are busier than others, but about 2 on average.
What are your long-term squash goals?
So for me, I have 2 main long-term squash goals. The first one is to make the men's national team to represent Team Canada. And the second one would be to achieve a world ranking inside the top 100.
Who is your all-time favorite squash player?
So I'd have to say I have 2 favorite squash players. The first one would be a guy named Jonathan Power. He's actually the first and only Canadian squash player to ever become number 1 in the world. And I've met him a couple of times, and I always aspired to, he was kind of my idol growing up. And then my second favorite player, kind of as I grew up a bit, he came to Winnipeg and did an exhibition when I was, I think, 12 years old, and his name is Gregory Gaultier. He's from France, and he was actually the number 1 player in the world for a couple years.
What countries have you traveled to for squash?
So because I've only been on tour for about a year, just over a year, I've actually mainly played tournaments within Canada and the US so far. So I've gone anywhere from Kelowna, Calgary, all the way east to Prince Edward Island. Toronto has a lot of tournaments, and then I've gone into the States as far south as San Francisco, California. And finally, I've also gone to Bermuda for squash as well.
What's your biggest achievement in squash so far?
So far, I've got a couple decent achievements, I'd say. I most recently won the Manitoba Open, and I've achieved one of my goals of becoming the top player in the province. Last year, I had also won the Alberta Open, and I think those are probably my 2 best so far.
What's your favorite memory of squash?
My favorite memory, so I'd say there's also two of my favorites that stick out. One is growing up when I was in my teenage years. I always went to summer squash camps. So my dad would actually run squash camps in Winnipeg where top junior players in Canada would come and stay at my house, and we would have a lot of fun with the squash itself and then just doing other activities. And I also went to some summer squash camps at Dartmouth University in the States, where I met a lot of new people from the States, and it was tons of fun. And then most recently we hosted at my home club the Canadian Men's Teams Championships, where each province sends their top 3 players and each province plays off. And I played one of my best matches there, and it was just really exciting because all the home crowd was there, and it actually got pretty loud and rowdy from the fans, which was pretty exciting.
Where can kids play squash in Winnipeg?
So this is one of the tough things about squash, and maybe a possible reason why it hasn't necessarily grown too big in the past, is squash is usually played mainly at private clubs, in which you have to have either a parent or a kid that gets a membership to play there. It used to be that squash would be at local gyms like the YMCA and Good Life Fitness, but unfortunately in recent years they've been starting to take them out because it takes up a lot of space and they're not seeing the revenue compared to how much space it's taking up. So right now there's 2 private clubs in Winnipeg, the Winnipeg Squash Racket Club and the Winnipeg Winter Club. But there's 5 courts at the University of Manitoba and 2 courts at the University of Winnipeg. And actually this last year, there's a program that was just started called the Winnipeg Junior Jesters, and that's actually a program that I was asked to coach and run, and it's run through the University of Winnipeg, and it was started to offer the opportunity for kids to try out squash that would not normally have the access to a squash court. So I ran the program. It was twice a week for about a 10-week period, and any kid that wanted to come out and try it could sign up. And it went from October to December, and then another one from January to March. And I believe we'll be trying to run it again. So if there's anyone out there that wants to try some squash, kind of look into that program and give you an opportunity.
That's all the questions. Thank you, Connor, for being in my presentation.
Much enjoyed. Thank you for having me.